go ahead and shut the doors and have everyone grab their seat. We're going to go ahead and get our Natural Resource Committee meeting started. Ready to get situated here. All right, well, welcome to our Natural Resource meeting. We have got some interesting stuff on the agenda, but let's get started if we could. Let's see, Representative McCool, would you lead us in prayer to get us started, please? If you'll please follow me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Folks, before we do roll call, do I have any members that have any special guests or any announcements? Or this is your time to speak. Representative Wheeler, or Senator Wheeler, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd just like to remember our late colleague, Johnny Turner. I think this is our first Natural Resources Committee meeting since his passing, and as you know, he was vice chair in the Senate Natural Resources Committee and was a very powerful voice for the coal industry and for jobs in eastern Kentucky, and I think that voice will be sorely missed on this committee.
I do appreciate the comments, and I think let's just offer a moment of silence for our colleague, Senator Turner. All right, and thank you for that. His I don't want to say his replacement, but the gentleman that will be coming in behind him is a friend of a lot of us, Mayor Maiden from over in Bell County, and fantastic friend of mine. I think I've known him about as long as I've known Johnny as well, and that's over 3.5 decades. But be fortunate to have a good, strong voice come in and pick up where Senator Turner left off. With that said, do we have any other special recognitions, any announcements that we have? Representative McCool.
Just like to recognize a couple of folks in my area. They'll be speaking in a moment, but Jason Kenner will be speaking, and Chuck Mead. Today is Jason's birthday, so happy birthday, Jason, and Chuck, former state legislator. So just glad that they're here today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlemen, good to have you with us. All right, well, let's get our roll call, get rolling here, please. Clerk, please call the roll.
Senator Chambers Armstrong, Senator Carpenter, Senator Mills, Senator Schickel, Senator Southworth, Senator Webb, here. Senator Westerfield, Senator Wheeler, here. Senator Williams, Representative Ballman, present. Representative Blanton, here. Representative Bowling,
here.
Representative Bridges, here. Representative Burke,
here.
Representative Chester Burton,
here.
Representative Dossett,
Present.
Representative Dotson, here. Representative Flannery,
here.
Representative Fugate,
here.
Representative Gentry,
here.
Representative Johnson,
Here.
Representative McCool,
Here.
Representative Miles, here. Representative Smith, here. Representative Wesley, Representative White, here. Representative Williams, Co-Chair Smith, present. And Co-Chair Gooch.
Here. All right, looks like we have a quorum. Do we need a motion for prior minutes? Yes. May have a motion for the prior motion and second. All those in favor with the sign of aye. Motion carries, opposed likewise. Looks like we're good to go, so we'll get that taken care of. I want to lead to my co-chairman, Gooch. Congratulations on your nice, sound victory you had in there. Do you have any comments for us as we get started for our meeting?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, but no. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, but really nothing comes to mind.
I thought it was. I was looking at Chuck Mead. I thought it was Hubie Collins up here with that blue coat on for a second when I looked around. But we had, just as our members take the table, we had a lot of members that just came through hard-fought elections. We're proud of you. It speaks volumes of your district. So welcome back to Natural Resources. We look forward to a very, very session with you being a part of it. Now, with that said, we have got Representative John Blanton at the table, and I'll turn it over to John. Have all your guests introduce themselves for our records, even though we know them all.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members of this committee, for allowing me and my guests to be here today to present an issue or a topic of something we've been working on to promote tourism in Eastern Kentucky over the last several years. I have with me to my left Representative Bobby McCool from the 97th District, and Jason Kenner. He is president of Anglers for Improving Opportunities, and to his right is Mr. Chuck Mead. He is a commissioner for our 7th District Fish and Wildlife here in the Commonwealth. Also joining us by Zoom from the great state of Texas this afternoon is Mr. Stephen Barden. He's the owner of and a fisheries biologist of Texas Pro Lake. Mr. Barton is a nationally renowned fisheries biologist. He also contracts and works for Major League Fishing. For those that are not aware, Kentucky is home to one of the largest professional bass fishing organizations in the world, known as Major League Fishing in Benton, Kentucky. And so he does a lot of work for Major League Fishing. And so today, Mr. Chairman and members, we want to talk a little bit about a species of bass known as F1 bass. It's a largemouth bass, and I'm going to leave this to Stephen to talk about the biology side here in just a moment. But what we're trying to do in Eastern Kentucky on a small lake called Paintsville Lake is we're trying to establish, to prepare the lake that we may stock it with these particular hybrid bass because of their rate of growth and their size of growth. And we're getting the lake prepared for that, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Kenner, and he's going to describe, and you do have in your packet a little printout that he put together talking about some of the things that we've done there at Paintsville Lake. And Anglers for Improving Opportunity is a nonprofit group put up of people from the Eastern Kentucky area, which I'm a member of, and they do a fantastic job of preserving our lakes there in Eastern Kentucky, and the conservation work they do is second to none. With that, Mr. Kenner, I'll turn it over to you.
So like you said, my name is Jason Kenner. I'm an educator by trade. I'm an athletic director and a teacher in Eastern Kentucky. And this kind of started as a passion project. You know, high school fishing has flourished in Eastern Kentucky. We've got more high school bass fishing teams having success on just incredible levels. We had a kid from Martin County High School that fished the Bassmaster Classic last year. In bass fishing, that is the Super Bowl of bass fishing. That's as high as you can go, in my opinion. You know, so it's just incredible the effect, the positive effect that fishing has had, you know, on Eastern Kentucky and other places throughout the state. But, you know, 3 years ago, we got with our county judge, Mark McKenzie in Johnson County. He said, hey, what can we do as a community to unite some of these groups and potentially invest into our lake to attract people to come to Eastern Kentucky? You know, you hear all too often people going to other states to chase largemouth bass. Largemouth bass is the #1 most sought after game fish, you know, in the United States. And, you know, we just said, what would a 10-pound bass be worth to a rural economy, you know, in Eastern Kentucky? We think that would be millions of dollars. You know, in Paintsville, we're home to Casting for Kids, which is a charitable organization that hosts the largest kids fishing tournament in the United States. Chris Ferguson started and runs that organization. 2 years ago, they built a handicap boardwalk in Paintsville, Kentucky on Paintsville Lake. It's incredible. Handicapped children can get right down to the water level and experience fishing just like, you know, anyone else. So it's the work that's been done on our lake and in my hometown, I'm proud of. Just this year alone, we recently received one of 8 Bass Pro Shops grants that's valued up to $22,000. We're going to put reef balls in Paintsville Lake. Last year, we've had several habitat, you know, efforts going on. We've received, I think, 3 grants up until this point. Our local tourism has invested this year. They bought $15,000 worth of threadfin shad, $15,000 worth of threadfin shad last year. So in 2 years, we've stocked 100,000 threadfin shad in Paintsville Lake on an experimental basis. Like I said, you know, we've contributed over 500 pieces of habitat. This summer, we took high school kids out, and they actually got to fell some trees on Paintsville Lake. It was a really cool experience for them, you know, to increase habitat in the lake. So, you know, this has been a community effort, and it's a community effort that we're proud of. We've involved kids. We've got kids talking about, you know, DNA as it relates to largemouth bass, you know, so that's just an incredible victory as far as we're concerned. You know, and I'm not going to get into necessarily any of the science because I'm not an expert on that. But, you know, really this effort just started with asking good questions. We wanted to educate, you know, people on things that we could do potentially to improve angling opportunities in Eastern Kentucky. And you can see there, you know, I've got a list of goals from the group. From the get-go, our original goal was to stock F1s. And we've worked over the past 3 years to try to do everything to improve our situation so that that project could potentially be successful. You can see there, we conducted a DNA study. That's one detail that I missed. And that's where we actually met Stephen Barden. Stephen's been all ears for us. It's incredible to reach out to some of these professionals. Stephen is one of the most renowned fisheries biologists in the country. When we reached out to him a couple years ago, he not only listened, he helped us to do our first DNA study in Kentucky on largemouth bass in 20 years. And again, I'm not into the science part of that, but we believe as anglers that understanding the DNA of our largemouth bass populations can help us grow bigger bass in the state of Kentucky and eventually improve angling opportunities and the economic impact that it has on our state. Just making sure I hit everything. And I think that's it. I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Barden, and he can fill in the gaps on the science there.
Stephen, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. I am Stephen Barden, a professional private sector fisheries biologist from Texas. I have a master's in fisheries science from Texas A&M and over 18 years of fish stocking experience throughout the United States. I own 2 companies. One of them is Pro Lake Management. We work on private lakes. And then I own a second company called Black Bass Stewardship Group. We build conservation elements for companies, brands, agencies, and events. In part of that, I'm the director of the Major League Fishing Fisheries Management Division. In that role, I represent the conservation efforts of about 45,000 tournament anglers. And as you've heard, our home headquarters is in Benton, Kentucky. Currently, I am the American Fisheries Society president for our Texas chapter, and I serve on the Texas Freshwater Fishing Advisory Committee. I have 5 years of experience teaching fisheries management and conservation at a university level. With this diverse experience, I have opportunities to work with state agencies, consult with angler groups, and provide expertise to the scientific and angling communities. Today, I want to share with the committee an opinion on the subject of how we manage fisheries and use the resource to improve bass fishing. This is similar to what I have expressed to both Jason and Representative Blanton, as well as the Kentucky Fish and Wildlife staff in the past. To understand the dynamics of how stocking fish works, it is a worthwhile endeavor to first understand how fisheries management works. I want to just give a quick primer to that. First, fish do not grow based on age. So there's no age-determined growth size or length or anything like that. Instead, it's through a process called indeterminate growth. This simply means that the growth rate of an individual is dictated and determined more by the amount of food it consumes in a given set of time or a year-long basis. If they consume enough forage, they'll grow to an advanced size. If they don't consume that forage, they will literally stay the same size their entire lives. Now, we don't manage our fisheries on an individual fish-by-fish basis. Instead, we manage them at a population level. So when we're managing at a population level, what we look at is carrying capacity, or the pounds of fish that a water body can grow. There's 5 major components of what dictates carrying capacity, increasing or decreasing that capacity. Those are forage. Jason mentioned stocking threadfin shad, but forage, you look at both the diversity and the size classes of forage to determine if the predatory fish are getting enough food to grow to the size we need them to grow. The next component is habitat, which includes water quality, more specifically like dissolved oxygen, plus physical habitat like vegetation, timber, rock, and how diverse it is in low density and high density. Fertility of water would be the third component. That dictates a relationship on how much plankton, which is the base of the food chain, can the fishery support, and that trickles up to the carrying capacity. The fourth component would be weather, which is really temperature determined. It's the number of optimal growing days that we have to where water temperatures between 60 and 80 degrees. And then the last one is competition for resources. So that would be number of individuals within a certain size class, as well as outside of that specific species, all species that are competing. So the carrying capacity is a very complex thing, and technically it is not measurable. I cannot look at Paintsville Lake and tell you how many pounds of bass can be grown. And in fact, it changes day to day, week to week, and annually. So instead, fisheries managers, they look at, instead of directly trying to measure that carrying capacity and say, what is it and how do we improve it? We use all these tools to try to maximize and increase that carrying capacity, and then look at the interaction at an individual level with the population to see, are we hitting growth and body condition standards? We call that standard relative weight. So how you calculate relative weight, and anybody can do this. An amateur angler up to a scientist can do this. You take the length and the weight of a fish, and you compare it to a standard weight. If that fish falls below 100%, simply it is underweight and not actively growing. If that fish falls above 100%, then that's an actively growing fish that's overweight. These are the things we instructed Jason and his team to do. We wanted to look at Paintsville Lake and determine, we can't calculate carrying capacity, but what we can do is look at relative weight. Whenever we determined that relative weight, we found that a lot of the fish in Paintsville Lake, if not all the fish, were underweight. They were not growing. So we then instructed Jason to look at the corrective tools that we use as fisheries managers. The first tool would be that assessment, where you're actually sampling fish, you're interviewing anglers, you're trying to determine if the fishery needs any corrective action. The second is typically something done by your DNR, which would be create regulation and attempt to manipulate the population through harvest. So you're decreasing certain size class of fish over time, try to increase that carrying capacity. The third one, which is something that Jason has kind of outlined that they took some measures in, would be altering habitat, and specifically through vegetation control or restoration, and then increasing fertility through fertilization, and finally adding physical habitat. Those efforts have been done on Paintsville Lake by that nonprofit that Jason has set up. And the final thing that we can kind of do to improve the carrying capacity of the reservoir would be, or tool we could use would be to use fish stocking. And Jason's team has started that with the forage using threadfin shad. And so that leaves the last tool, the last part of that tool would be corrective stocking with the predators, in this case, largemouth bass, to see if we can increase the growth. Stocking is simply a tool. It is used whenever it's used correctly in concert with those other tools. It results in improvements, number one, in fish abundance, but also in growth rates and overall size. When it is done incorrectly, of course, it wastes time and money. What we see in Paintsville Lake is that for the past 3 years, the Angler Group has been willing to participate. They've actively worked with the Kentucky Fish and Wildlife to use these tools. They assess the relative weight and the genetics. In this, they determined that the fish were underweight. So then they engage the other tools with plant control, physical habitat manipulation, fertilization, and forage stocking. They've reached all the places that they could reach at this point. This has resulted in improvements. You can see that in both relative weights and overall size increase in the bass in Paintsville Lake. But the tool that is left to maximize the fishery is simply stocking more bass in specific genetics to reach our goals. 3 years ago, whenever Jason brought this information to me and we started doing the assessment, I simply told him stocking F1 bass will not improve Paintsville Lake because all those tools haven't been utilized. So if we would have stocked F1s 3 years ago, what we would have seen is those fish would have grown at the same rate as the natural occurring bass. But now they've increased the potential carrying capacity and started to maximize it, meaning fish that are stocked today should have a better growth rate and overall size outcome. Now, stocking bass feels advantageous at this point, but it is going to be a tool that is used to not only increase individual size, but change the genetic diversity within the fishery. And the attempt would be to improve either aggression of the individual fish or promote a faster growth rate or a larger overall size compared to that naturally occurring bass. If those three things are the goal, if those three things are the aggression, the overall size, and the faster growth rate, then in concert with the other tools, we can see success at Paintsville Lake. The debate that you're going to get into is over some semantics of the type of bass that should be stocked. In fishery science, the community has no clear, true definition of what a species is, and you're going to hear, you're going to hear a lot of noise around this subject. If you look at a pure definition of a species across all science, then a species would be an individual that can replicate via reproduction and create another individual that can continue that. Their offspring can continue to replicate that species. So simply, if you take a male zebra and a female zebra and they reproduce, they always produce a zebra. They cannot produce an ostrich, right? They cannot jump from species to species. There is a situation where you take two closely related species and you combine them, and they will always produce a sterile hybrid. With fish, the reason this is so complicated is because we have examples that contradict that. We also have examples that showcase that. So if I take a white bass and a striped bass and I combine them, they create a sterile hybrid. The debate is if I take a northern largemouth bass and I cross that with a Florida bass, it creates a species that can then reproduce and create itself again. So they're so closely related, they create this reproductive hybrid, which in science we actually call an integrate. The F1 that we're speaking about today is a first generation integrate between a northern and a Florida largemouth bass. This does not create a separate species, but is more like a breed. And truthfully, when we look at fisheries management and the debate on this science, you're going to have a line that is drawn between some scientists who believe northern largemouth bass and Florida bass are two separate species. And then you're going to have another line that is drawn with biologists who use the definition of every other species, which is to create a sterile hybrid and recognize that Florida largemouth and northern largemouth are more like a breed. So we look at this, if we relate it to dogs, all dogs are technically Canis lupus. That's their scientific name, because all dogs, no matter what, are the same species, but there are 400 different breeds that make up that family. So you can see how this is a little complicated whenever we're talking about the semantics of what genetics should we stock. To make this more complicated, by appearance alone, no angler or scientist can see the difference between a Florida and northern largemouth bass. So I cannot physically hold one of these fish and tell you that it's a 90% Florida, a 50% Florida, or a 0% Florida. This means that for your biologist, for your anglers, and even your enforcement officers, they won't be able to tell these fish without doing genetic testing. They won't be able to tell if they're integrades or pure species. The only physical difference is that the Florida bass have a slightly smaller scale. And so you could try to count scales to determine if they are truly Floridas or if they have that Florida genetic. Some will argue against this stocking tool also because naturally bass do spawn in Paintsville Lake. They spawn in every reservoir. And what you have with natural reproduction is you have a very large number of fry that are produced every single year, and a small subsect of those fry survive to adulthood and recruit into the adult population. What you're going to hear is that stocking often is cited to be less impactful because the cost of an individual fish means the number of fish that you stock will never compare to natural reproduction. However, numerous long-term stocking programs has disproven this fact. One example is the Texas Parks and Wildlife Share-Lunker program, showing that targeted reproduction and stocking has increased the number of reservoirs within our state that produce fish over 13 pounds. They have also found through genetic studies that daughters and granddaughters of share-lunkers that have entered the program have produced offspring that also reach 13 pounds and are found in our reservoirs. This familiar DNA contradicts what you might hear about the effects of stocking. You've seen projects like this as well in neighboring states like Tennessee, who has successfully shifted the genetics of Chickamauga reservoir away from northern largemouth bass to Florida largemouth bass. And they've done that through 30 years of consecutive stocking. Now, the timing of stocking, the size of individual stocks, and the individual aggression and growth rates of the fingerling stocks can create a competitive advantage. And when that competitive advantage is used, they will overtake natural reproduction. So what this means is that as you replace the fish at a high rate, you can see the results of the projects. So it's a simple theory. If you stock bass fingerlings, you'll likely see the exact same number of bass survive to the end of the year. The difference is that the fish that you stock, as long as they're stocked at the correct time, size, and with those competitive advantages, they're going to integrate into the population at a higher rate. So with all that being said, you have an angler group that is a willing participant. They've used every tool available to them with one tool left, which is this bass stocking. If our goal is to increase bass growth, overall size of fish, attract tourism, then this tool may be a big advantage because it's going to speed up this process. It will need to be done correctly. So it will need to utilize the correct size of fish, genetics of fish, and timing of stocking to be successful. It will cost money, and it should be properly funding and for a meaningful timeline. You cannot stock fish 1 year and expect large results. You have to stock them consecutive years. It will require assessment by the agency. So assessment in are these fish integrating in this population at a high rate, which takes time to see because we have to see genetic analysis of adult size classes to see their integration into the population. This stocking should be done in concert with solidifying some funding on habitat improvements because that's going to continue to increase that carrying capacity. It should be done in collaboration with the agency. And truthfully, since I'm in front of the entire Natural Resource Committee, I would like to say it should be done across agencies, not just Kentucky Fish and Game. We should look at how all interagencies interact with water quality improvements or water quality in our reservoirs. And we should encourage harvest regulation changes that will improve the carrying capacity and be adopted by anglers. Should this tool be limited to only native largemouth bass? In my opinion, no. Instead, we should use the best science and try to understand and take a common sense approach to the fact that the Florida genetic in the F1 intergrade does help us reach our goals, which is to grow fish at a faster rate and to a larger size. With that explanation, if I have questions, I'd love to take those now.
Mr. Chairman, before you take questions for Stephen, let me say this to build off what he's been talking about. Why are we here? What are we talking about today on these F1s that we've been working for? There's probably not a whole lot of bass fishermen sitting here on this committee. I get that. So if you're not in the bass fishing world, I happen to fish one of Major League Fishing's series that they have. I don't know that you'll understand the impact that bass fishing has on our economy. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. I think most of you would be surprised to know that your average bass fisherman that's tournament fishing today, bass boats are starting at about $75,000 and going north of $100,000. Electronics on a boat is not uncommon to be $20,000+. A rod and reel combo will start at $500 and go up to over $1,000, and they'll have 25 of them in their boat. It's a big industry. There's a lot of money in it. And so we just received a credit upgrade from the credit rating companies. And part of the things they mentioned was our tourism in Kentucky that was helping to solidify this good credit rating. We are trying not build for people in Johnson County or Eastern Kentucky a place to catch bigger fish. But what we've seen in Tennessee and Chickamauga, it attracts more bass tournaments. It attracts people coming there on vacation. They're seeking this elusive, bigger, largemouth, 8, 10-pound bass as trophy fish. So it's drawing people in, which is going to bring tourism dollars into the region. And that's kind of what we're looking for here, is a way to promote tourism for us in Eastern Kentucky through these largemouth bass. Stephen, sorry to interrupt there. Great job. Now, members, if anybody has any questions of any of us or Stephen, we'd be glad to entertain those.
And thanks for the breakdown. Yeah, there's a lot of interest and a lot of questions for it. I'm curious, what's the size of this lake? How big of a lake? And I've been over there before, but it's just kind of hard to gauge which is bigger, Cars Fork, Buckhorn, these over there. And they're not a lot of difference in them, but what's the size of this overall lake?
Yes, sir, about 1,100 acres.
Okay, and what's the history? Was this so we dammed up a stream over there, left the tailwaters?
Yes, sir.
Into effect, and what year was that? In the 62?
1979.
79, so it's a little bit older than.
It's managed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. It is a flood control dam, much like most all of our lakes in Eastern Kentucky, Car Fork, Buckhorn. It's a flood control lake by the Corps.
Well, since you brought up our dear friends at the Army Corps of Engineers, I am fascinated to know what is their opinion. Have they weighed in on this? Because that will be very fascinating to see if they're willing to go along with this.
I would say that at this point in time they've been fairly cooperative. They've
Absolutely.
Some of the tree cutting things where they fall trees into water and things, they have to get approval from the Corps, and they've been willing to work and say, okay, you can do X number of trees. And
Yes, sir.
so thus far, I would say the cooperation's been
It's been incredible.
yeah.
Good. That's
Even
very happy to hear that.
Senator Smith, even on the threadfin, no headaches, unbelievably. I mean, it was smooth.
On-
They're thrilled with it.
And Chairman Smith, let me speak real fast. This is not just for Paintsville. If this study works, as an agency and as a commission member, we would look to take that to maybe Buckhorn. We'll have to see what lakes that it thrives at and what size and those kind of things. But I believe the impact is huge. But this will be a trial for Paintsville, because we don't want Western Kentucky lakes to say no. We don't want Buckhorn. But if this thing is successful, like we think it will be, it'll be a gold standard for the rest of the Commonwealth to capitalize on those dollars for tourism.
Well, I don't think there's any doubt. I mean, you've got Dacker Combs. Those boys are probably at Cherokee right now this weekend, and you get over there and everybody's from. I'm trying to think of the little breakfast spot by the bridge, but they're all from here. I think the guy that owns the restaurant is from over in Hazard. So
Stephen had something you wanted to say.
Yeah, we've got a couple questions for him. So I tell you what, let's do. Let me. I've got a lot of members up here, and I know I don't want to keep everybody all day. So let's go ahead and go to a couple of them. Representative Gentry, I'll go ahead and let you ask your questions.
Thank you, guys. And I have several, but I won't ask them all because I know we're hurting for time here. But Representative Blanton, let me first say that, and you've probably heard me talk about this before. I know for several years we came in at the same time, and there's been this push to go to all consumptive-based tax system. And I have shouted and talked about where I think a lot of our investments should be, and what my concerns are with that is we need to do a lot more investing in things that draw out-of-state revenue, this seems to be another one of many, many things that can be looked at. I'm also a scientist, and I know with fellow scientists, a lot of times when we go to introduce a new species to something, there are questions and antennas that go up. Okay, what is the impact going to be on the ecosystem? My first question was going to be, who's going to be opposed to this and why? And I think Steve's done a pretty good job of addressing that before I asked for the question. So let me say this, and I think the gentleman on the end here, sorry I forgot your name, but may have addressed this as well with other lakes, but has this F1 species been introduced in any lakes in Kentucky? I think you mentioned something about Tennessee. If so, what have been the results, and what could be our concerns from ecosystem disruption, even though it might help the fish species? Do you want to comment on that at all to help me feel easy with this? But other than that, I'm all for lowering overall tax burden by bringing more out-of-state tax dollars into our state.
John, tell them what Tennessee said.
Stephen, you want to start and I'll follow up. You have anything to address on that?
I do. Following the Paintsville Lake DNA study, the Kentucky Fish and Wildlife embarked in their own research into the genetics across the state and found that their hatchery system had Florida genetics in it at some point, and they were, although not purposefully, they were stocking integrated fish throughout the state at different periods of time. We also know in the private sector that there was no regulation against the introduction of Florida or F1 largemouth, and that several private companies within the state have been utilizing these fish for the last 20 years. Recently, it sounds like the Kentucky Fish and Wildlife have determined that they would try to limit the introduction of pure Floridas to try to preserve the northern genetic fish. And that becomes, once again, the question of semantics of, do you consider these separate species or more like a breed?
Also, and I would point out, there is a private lake in Lexington that's been stocking these bass for the past 10 years and having a great deal of success. And I personally know members of the board of that lake, and that's one of the ways I come to know about these.
One quick thing, if I could add, when we started out from a science-based approach, we didn't want to change anything, have a negative effect long term. So that's why we started with DNA, and that's how we met Mr. Barden. But in the Fish and Wildlife sample, they had 2 fish that were 21% Florida DNA. But, we've all heard stories about how those fish got here over the years. Anyone's an angler had always heard, so-and-so went to Florida or Alabama, they caught that fish and they brought it back in their live well and put it in our lakes. We've all heard those stories. So our theory from the get-go was we do not have a pure northern strain largemouth bass population, and that was proven correct. So our theory
and
that
Jason, additionally, F1 largemouth are stocked into Kentucky Lake by Tennessee DNR, so they don't know the state boundaries, and therefore those fish are in your Kentucky side of the lake as well.
Yes, sir. It's very interesting as you dig into this topic.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I would just say, if we move forward with this, if there's any way at all we could put any kind of, I don't know if guardrail might be too strong of a term, but just be aware of anything we could do to not necessarily what you just talked about, how it could get into other fisheries where maybe we may not want them there, and I don't know if that even exists, but just I'm sure y'all are thinking about that. So,
yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just real quick for Mr. Barden. When you stock a lake like this, we know females, they're talking about getting weighed up for competition. We know females are the only ones that really go past 5 pounds, I believe. Is there a determination on when you stock one, how you separate male to female to make sure you're getting more female in there for what they're trying to, what they're trying to do is, the ultimate goal, I guess, is to have competition for heavier weight fish because you win by the weight. Is that something that's looked at when you stock? I was just wondering how you decide, or how you, without dissecting, how you was able to determine male and female so you make sure you're stocking it for the purpose.
That is an excellent question. Sexual dimorphism, which is the difference between males and females, does occur, but it occurs only in the adult stage. So as those fish exceed 5 pounds, and you're right on with that number. Before that time, the only way to determine sex is using a pipette technique, where we insert a pipette into the fish and try to produce gametes where we can see if that fish produces eggs or sperm. That approach can begin at 10 inches in size. So there is an approach where you put stocking at 10-inch or larger fish and you physically assess those fish, but whenever you do that, you pay an exorbitantly high cost for those fish. So instead, we often opt to use fingerling size fish. Those are 3 to 4 inches to save money, which means you're getting a mixed sex population.
Very good. Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I ask my question, I think you've identified a concern that we need to deal with immediately, and that's the ignorant Tennessee fish. I think we need to put some flyers in the water or something to get them back where they belong. But perhaps that's for another committee. And I'll do serious, Mr. Chairman. My first question is, what is your timeline? My second question is, are you looking for money?
So I'll field that one. We haven't asked for a dime from Kentucky Fish and Wildlife from the get-go. Our community support's been incredible. I think we've got a base that we could raise money to fund these fish. And honestly, Representative, I feel like that as an angler at this point, people want to put their money into this lake. We've watched the community step up with the shad and the habitat and other things, and I think this is a place that anglers can fill that gap.
May I answer that question also? We will be discussing this in our December commission meeting, and we will be taking a vote as a commission sometime first of the year, maybe as high as March. And we've recommended that Fish and Wildlife do 5,000 fish per year for 5 years for the study, and Fish and Wildlife will consume that cost. And as everyone's aware, the sportsmen and sportswomen fund Fish and Wildlife, so it wouldn't be any taxpayer.
What? Just curious, Chuck. What are we talking about? What was 5,000 fish cost? I apologize. I don't know. Is that
Stephen, what would 5,000 fingerlings run?
Depends on the size you want them, but between 50 cents per individual up to maybe $2 a fish if we were going with 6 or 8 inch fish.
Which would equate to, obviously it comes in trucks.
$10,000
We're talking
a year.
$10,000-$15,000? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
That helps us because, really the range for me could have been 100,000 or more. I really
Absolutely.
didn't understand.
But I think, and in conversations I've had with Stephen before, actually probably need to go more than 5,000 if possible. Wouldn't you say, Stephen, to be successful, to give us our best chance of success?
If I was managing the fishery, we would stock it at least 30 fish per acre, so it would be 30,000 fish. If we purchased them at the correct time of year, we could get those fish for as low as 50 cents a head. So we're still talking a budget of 15,000. If we wait until those fish have grown to an advanced size, we're looking at maybe $1 a head, so $30,000. I've built a similar program in the Chaffalaya Basin of Louisiana, where we had one single angler group that did one fundraiser and raised $85,000 for this similar project. And we're able to purchase them fish at 50 cents a head, and they used every bit of that budget in stock, and they do that every single year. So as Jason has indicated, the fishing community would be very supportive of this and would definitely help fund additional fish stocking.
So, and the reason I want to show this is this isn't real expensive. When we're talking about funding in government, we're generally talking about at minimum hundreds of thousands, if not millions. We're talking about, 30,000 at the most expensive to do it right each year, maybe as low as 15,000, right? So it's not like this is a huge amount. So anyways, go ahead, Mr. Chairman, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I was going to say, just following what you were saying earlier about getting the bigger fish in there, and once they start catching these 6-pound, hopefully 7-pound fish, they get real excited about it. But to get them there, you were saying that you have to have a balance between the fish and the food sources available. So as you're injecting, I imagine you bring these fish on truck, you put them in the lake. Do you also increase the nutrient content? Is there another aspect of funding here that we've got to, or do they just fight it out on the bottom of the lake to see who the strongest is going to survive? How do we catch up with the nutrition value?
We've already been doing that. That's the stocking of the thread fin that we've done the last couple of years.
And I think too, we've really worked to change the perception there. Our Facebook page has a pretty good, influence, and we've talked about harvest. That's one of the major issues that Stephen helped us identify that plagues most of our lakes, Car Fork, Paintsville, Yatesville. Most guys don't harvest small bass. You've probably heard Senator, we put everything back. Catch and release wasn't, intended to be what it became, and it's actually hurt some of our smaller lakes.
We've got several more here. Representative Wesley, we'll yield to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is more of a comment. I'm a representative for the 91st District on the Kentucky River. So pools 11, 12, and 13 on the locks. We got hit with a bad flood. And a lot of our anglers, this is more of a comment towards Representative Blanton, the impact that comes to our communities, we really don't have an idea until we have committee meetings like this. So just to testify on that part, I would like to say that Fish and Wildlife came a couple years back after the flood because our anglers and all our fishing clubs said that there's no fish between pools 12 and 13. So they came down, and I just want to give Fish and Wildlife a shout out because the response from these fingerlings that was released through with our FFA, and it's good. It's a good program to work with our kids. So they came down, they released these fish into the Kentucky River. And in the past 2 years, I've had these fishing clubs reach out to us. The size that they are gaining in our pools. But what I want to say is we got fishing tournaments coming on now that is bringing in people from out of state, out of the counties. And I just wanted to thank Fish and Wildlife for what they did because we was just empty, and appreciate what they done because it's really helped our community. When you see a lot of past tournaments starting to come and the money that they spend in our little communities, it helps us. So I just want to thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Very good. That's a good point. Senator Webb.
Thank you. And there's a lot of things in this presentation that we can agree on. I think as sportsmen and women, certainly helping Paintsville, Johnson County. I mean, I'm a Johnson County Webb, so I'm all for that, and anything in East Kentucky to drive tourism. But one problem we have with habitat in those core regulated lakes in East Kentucky is water level. And sometimes it's very hard to get a spawn, regardless of stocking, regardless of species or anything else, because their mission's flood control, and we're sort of at their mercy. So that's another factor that is involved is water level for fish spawning and size, and that's why sometimes the shad outperform the bass. But other than that, and I think we can all agree on stocking, or Fish and Wildlife wouldn't have fisheries, the successful national model fisheries program that we have now. But what I'm concerned about, and I don't know if it's a concern, but I think we need a lot more data about the science and the genetics in fish, and sometimes in F1s. We have to, I'd ask Stephen about the hybrid vigor, and if that diminishes with generations over time. I know Tennessee stocked Florida, a lot of pure Floridas too, and they're doing F1s now. But I think the initial round was Florida bass, which is the mother or father of what we're talking about here. So I'd like to expand on that, but I like some others have some concerns about genetics and the sustainability when you're dealing with hybrids and the history and the data of sustainability.
Yes, ma'am. Great question. I think that the hard part is that the F1 hybrid is a brand, basically, because it's actually an intergrade, not a hybrid. A hybrid would be a sterilized fish. You are correct that they would have some hybrid vigor, but that hybrid vigor comes from the Florida genetic specifically side that allows them to have a faster and larger growth rate. The northern side gives them longevity in the population by increasing their lifespan and their cold tolerance. The theory, and I've worked with Tennessee on this as well, the theory of putting pure Floridas in would be that you create your own hybrids or intergrades within the fishery because you're creating your own F1s by allowing the natural native northerns to cross with the Floridas to create those individuals. The issue in Kentucky may be that a pure Florida cannot be sustainable long-term because of its inability to have cold tolerance. So you would be using the integrated fish to try to introduce the Florida genetic at a lower rate to allow them to still be able to survive winter temperatures.
Are we seeing any outbreeding depression like in other hybrid forms for generations on?
The diversity within your fish population and in the fact that fish don't have lifelong mating, they instead have multiple spawning partners throughout even one season, reduces the likelihood of that. Whenever we do population dynamics and we're looking at genetics, we can look at familiar relations now, and we don't see that our fish populations have that inbreeding as often as I think we even predicted in science.
Thank you. But those are just some of the concerns, Mr. Chairman. I think
Absolutely.
move forward that we need to, have the science on our side too, like was stated earlier by the panel, and we appreciate them. Thank you.
Okay, good questions. Thank you, Senator Webb. Senator Wheeler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess one question I have, I know all of these are Corps of Engineers lakes, and this sounds like a great project. Is there any pushback at all from the feds? I can recall when the Corps of Engineers did like a reclamation project behind my house. They came out for 3 weeks with some nets to look for the bats, as many people from Eastern Kentucky may be familiar with in these types of situations. Have they given any pushback at all as far as introducing the species into these types of lakes? I know when we've approached them about other things, the Corps is in general quite uncooperative on new economic ventures.
And Senator Wheeler, that's absolutely what I expected going into this too, was, just a long line of stalemates. And unbelievably on the stocking side, and I want to give a shout out, like Representative Wesley too, our local Fish and Wildlife, Jason Russell and our Eastern Fisheries biologists, they've just been unbelievable. They've been incredibly beneficial to this effort. So I think with their blessing, if we can get that approved through Fish and Wildlife, I don't think we'll have any obstacles with the Army Corps.
Thank you.
And speaking of Fish and Wildlife, Commissioner Storm is actually, I think, in Alabama with the incident where the warden had passed away, and so he normally would be here if there's any questions. But they have done an amazing job. And Chuck Mead, our old friend, welcome you. This is probably one of your first meetings since you've been on the commission.
First meeting, it is.
Glad to see you
Chairman,
back in this chamber, and
thank you.
Don't want you stirring up trouble or anything. Now
No,
you be,
no, sir, no.
but it's good to have you on there. I think you'll do a fantastic job. Ladies and gentlemen of Natural Resources, do we have any other members that have any follow-up questions or any comments that you'd like to make at this time? All right, seeing none, Representative Blant, do you have any closing arguments or discussions you'd like to make?
No, I would like to say this in closing. I want to thank Fish and Wildlife for their work and their efforts. Dave Greaves over there, the head biologist, he put on a black bass training, if you will, back in the summer. Summit, it was called, I believe. They did a fantastic job. They had fishermen, professional fishermen, they had commercial fishermen, they had people involved from across the state there. Jason and I both participated in that. Was really helpful. I know this has probably been boring to some of you all sitting and listening to some of this stuff go on, but for those that enjoy this stuff, it's really been good. And the Black Bass Management Summit they put on was great, and I appreciate the cooperation and efforts with them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
No, we appreciate it. You'd mentioned that $30,000. Can you imagine the amount of money that would come in there in one tournament? You would see probably that money come back in there. Probably 4 or 5 rigs would be worth more than the $30,000. So thanks for the presentation and the time today. We certainly enjoyed it. I have nothing further in front of the committee unless the Vice Chairman does. You have anything for us? Then I need a motion to adjourn. All those in favor, sign of aye.